The scent of rosemary and pine was the only thing that dared to move in the small stone cottage. Outside, the night was a velvet cloak, soft and silent, punctuated only by the distant rhythmic chirping of the river frogs. Inside, a single fat tallow candle cast a honeyed halo over the faces of Elara and Thomas. They sat at a heavy, scarred wooden table, the remnants of a modest, perfect dinner pushed aside, a polished bowl that once held simple stew, crusts of brown bread, and 2 chipped mugs of spiced, watered wine. The cottage itself had been a decade of labor. The heavy, scarred wooden table, where they now sat, was the first thing Thomas had built, its surface polished by 10 years of elbows, candle wax, and shared meals. The firelight played across the iron pots and pans. Elara kept meticulously clean above the hearth. Even the simple stew, now cold, seemed sacred. This small corner of the world, carved out of the hostile wilderness, was their masterpiece, fortified by shared jokes and quiet vows. Thomas leaned back, his broad farmer's hands resting on his stomach. The hard work of the day, the mending of the fence line, the splitting of enough firewood to see them through the next week's chill, had settled into a satisfying ache. He watched Elara as she meticulously wiped the table with the damp cloth, her movements graceful and familiar. "Did you like the stew?" she asked, not looking up, but knowing his gaze was on her. "The best yet, my heart," Tomas said, his voice a low, gravelly comfort. "The best yet. That thyme from the clearing, it's sweeter than the store-bought stuff." Elara finally looked up and smiled, and the candle flame caught the deep, honest warmth in her eyes. It was a smile that had been his anchor for 10 years, a quiet promise of security against the cold, indifferent world outside their heavy oak door. They had carved this life out of nothing, a patch of hard ground, a few chickens, a stream, and their fierce, abiding love. It was a life built on small, shared moments, the passing of a warm mug, the silent language spoken over a fire, the profound peace of simply existing beside one another. They spoke of the morrow, but they were rooted deeply in the unshakable peace of the present moment. "You'll tire of it eventually, you know," she teased, folding the cloth. "Never," he countered, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his own. His skin was rough from the axe handle. Hers is smooth from the careful tending of their small kitchen garden. The contrast was the story of their life together. "Never, and tomorrow I'll try to bring back that new fish I saw down by the weir. What do you say to fried river perch and dandelion greens?" Elara squeezed his hand. "Sounds like a king's feast, my love." "A king's feast." She moved to extinguish the candle, allowing the soft glow of the banked fire in the hearth to take over, bathing the room in shadows that felt friendly and safe. The world was small, quiet, and contained. Their future stretched before them, a simple, warm tapestry, woven of shared chores, quiet nights, and the unshakable certainty of the other's presence. The sound was not loud, but it was immediate and utterly alien to the night's calm. It was the sickening thwack of something wet and heavy hitting wood, followed instantly by the tearing rasp of aged timber fibers giving way. Peace evaporated like morning mist under a sudden sun. Thomas was on his feet before the sound fully registered, his mind skipping the beats of confusion and going straight to the ice-cold spike of primal fear. Elara gasped, a sharp choke sound that Thomas felt in his own throat. "The door!" he hissed, his hand already sweeping to the wall where the heavy-bladed woodsman's axe hung on a wrought-iron hook. The thick oak of the entrance was shuddering, and a splintered gap was visible near the latch. Through the jagged rent, a pair of eyes glowed back, not the clear, reflective eyes of a harmless animal, but yellow, malicious pinpricks of cunning and hunger. Goblins. They were the scuttling plague of the forest fringes, creatures of foulness and spite, usually too cowardly to venture so close to a lit hearth. But 3 of them, judging by the frenzied battering, was a pack bold enough for murder. "Go! The back window!" Thomas roared, wrenching the axe from the hook. Its familiar weight felt insufficient, suddenly just a thin barrier between everything he loved and the void. Elara didn't argue. She knew panic was fatal. Her fear was a bitter taste, sharp and overwhelming, but it sharpened her focus. She snatched the heavy iron cooking skillet from its rack and a long, wickedly pointed carving knife from the block. She turned back just as the latch finally groaned, split, and surrendered. The three invaders tumbled into the dim light of the cottage, a hideous, snarling tide of filth and violence. The air immediately thickened with the reek of damp earth, unwashed hide, and something acridly sulphurous. They were stunted, hunched things, clad in rags and scraps of leather, their skin the color of swamp mud, their teeth like broken pottery. They carried crude, wickedly barbed short spears and rusty axes. The first goblin, its face a mask of avarice, charged Tomas. Tomas met the charge not with skill, but with the berserk desperation of a husband defending his heart. The woodsman's axe was too long for the cramped room, but he swung it in a wide, desperate arc. He didn't seek a clean kill, only a barrier. It didn't connect with the creature's head, but it smashed into its shoulder with a wet crunch. The goblin shrieked, a sound like gravel poured down a pipe, and stumbled back, its crude spear clattering. "Get back!" Tomas yelled, planting his feet, the terror giving way to a white-hot, singular rage. "They will not touch her." The second goblin, smaller, quicker, scampered around the periphery of the light, aiming for Elara, who was now pressed against the rough stone wall. The third stayed low, scuttling under the table, aiming to hamstring Tomas. The fight became a whirlwind of desperate movement. Tomas had the axe. It was heavy and powerful, but slow. His massive wood axe became a brutal pendulum. He grunted, bringing it down again on the wounded first goblin, which was trying to scramble away. This time, the flat of the blade caught the side of its head with crushing force, and the creature collapsed, its limbs twitching once before going still. One down. A cold surge of hope, immediately followed by the sickening realization that two remained, and they were adapting. The small goblin darted at Elara, its short spear thrusting low. She slammed the iron skillet down, deflecting the spear and catching the goblin's arm. The sickening scrape of metal on iron saved her life by inches, but she felt bone give way in the creature's arm and heard a squeal of pain. The creature was tenacious. She swung the pan back in a wide, punishing arc aimed at the creature's head, but before she could connect, the third goblin, the one that had been under the table, lunged at Tomas's leg. It drove its rusty axe into his calf. Tomas bellowed, a sound of agony and fury, dropping to one knee. The sudden flood of pain was not a sharp cut, but a deep, jarring explosion that stole his breath and the power from his leg, sending him crashing. The axe slipped from his grasp, sliding across the stone floor and coming to rest near the hearth. The two surviving goblins saw their advantage and pressed it. The one Elara had injured, ignoring its broken arm, sprang forward, tackling her waist. They went down in a messy tangle of limbs and cloth, the carving knife skittering away uselessly. Elara screamed, fighting the creature's fetid breath and razor teeth. She clawed at its eyes, but its grip was immense for its size. Meanwhile, the third goblin, having crippled Tomas, now stood over him. Tomas grabbed the short, wickedly pointed piece of firewood he'd left beside the fire pit. His hand closed around the sliver of pointed wood, a desperate, final, clumsy weapon. With his last ounce of strength, he drove the improvised stake up and into the soft underside of the goblin's jaw. The third goblin gargled, its eyes bulging, and fell forward onto Tomas, a heavy dead weight, two down. But the victory was a whisper, a fraction of a second too late. The first goblin, the small, vicious one still locked with Elara, had found purchase. Its broken, jagged teeth tore into her throat. Her body seized in a silent, shuddering arc, and then she went slack, the life draining out of her eyes as quickly as the blood began to pool on the floor. Tomas, trapped beneath the corpse of the third goblin and paralyzed by the searing pain in his leg, could only watch, his chest heaving, his scream dying in his lungs. He saw the firelight reflect in her suddenly empty gaze, and the world fractured. The tapestry of their future, the king's feasts, the quiet mornings, the the shared old age, was shredded in an instant. The first goblin rose from Elara, its face and chest smeared with her blood. It gave a triumphant wet hiss and looked at the sole remaining attacker, the one still clutching its mangled shoulder. The two creatures stared at the ruined man and the still woman. Their momentary courage had paid off. They had lost one of their own, but the big, scary humans were broken. The wounded goblin limped to the table, sweeping the mugs and bowl aside. The surviving leader, after giving Elara's body a quick, vicious kick, began to ransack the small chest by the bed. They ignored the food and the bedding, interested only in metal. They grabbed a heavy, dull silver locket, a small pouch containing a few worn silver coins, and Thomas's old sturdy belt buckle. These hard-won treasures, items of no great value but shiny enough for a goblin's eye, were hastily stuffed into a ragged sack. The goblin's crude savagery had definitively triumphed over the human's domestic peace. After a final hungry glance at the immobile Thomas, who lay silent and defeated beneath the weight of his kill, the two surviving goblins vanished back through the splintered door. They were gone, scampering back into the silent darkness of the forest, their loot jostling in the sack. Their retreat was a victory march. They had lost one, but they had extinguished the light and stolen the future of the humans. The silence that followed was immense, heavy, and final. Thomas lay there, the smell of blood, pine smoke, and goblin stench filling the air. The fire still glowed, casting its warm, familiar light, but the warmth was a cruel mockery. One goblin had succumbed to their desperate strength, but the fight had been for their future, and that fight was lost. Thomas lay paralyzed beneath the filth-covered corpse. His scream was choked by the dead weight above him, leaving only a ragged, silent tearing in his chest. He looked at the axe, just inches away, and realized he no longer had the strength to crawl to it. He had killed two, but he had failed to defend the one thing that mattered. The terror had faded, leaving only a vast, aching numbness where his future used to reside. The goblins took silver and leather, small, meaningless tokens of wealth, but they had left with everything he owned. He turned his head slowly, painfully, to look at Elara's still form. The smile she had given him moments ago, the promise of tomorrow's feast, was gone, replaced by the terrible sudden blankness of the dead. The thought of river perch and dandelion greens was a cold, bitter stone in his gut. The dinner had been perfect indeed. It was a king's feast. It had been their last. Tomas and Elara would never again share the simple, profound ritual of breaking bread in the sanctuary they had built. Tonight, in their beautiful ruined cottage, both humans had lost everything. By morning, dew clung to the cobwebs outside. The river flowed, the birds sang, and the forest breathed on, completely oblivious to the cottage's tragedy. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe to the channel, and click that notification bell so you don't miss any more of the science fiction and fantasy tales of the FantaSci-Rhino. Thank you for watching all the way through.